Welcome to another edition of Anglican Unscripted. This is episode 42. If this is your first time watching us, this is a show where two men and some friends and contributors get to sit down and talk about all things Anglican. News, events, people, places, things, the Anglican lottery. We talk about it all. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger. And today is June 2nd, 2012.
Today in history. George, this is a famous day in history. Well, most of our today in histories are, but this is the Queen's Jubilee over in England. And basically what they're celebrating is 60 years of Queen Elizabeth serving as the monarch of England. And that's a big deal. Not many people make it 60 years or 50 years. In fact, there's some summers back in the 15th and 16th centuries where you could have 2 or 3 monarchs in a summer. And so this is a... Yes.
And not too many people become Queen of England either. I mean, it's really a small select group we're talking about.
It is. It's rare. And it's kind of cool that we get to honor this because she serves the function of the church, George.
Yes, she is the protector of the Church of England. Jesus is the head, but she is the protector.
And what's interesting is she's kind of served in both roles as queen and protector of the church quite well. There's not been any big controversies, no scandals. The worst press she's got was not showing enough emotion at Princess Di's death. But other than that, I think she's really escaped unscathed and has been a role model for queens and role models for protectors of the church.
Well, as Supreme Governor of the Church of England and as Queen of England, she has displayed an integrity and a depth of character that is rare, not only among monarchs, but among people today. And I think the Church of England would be very different, as England as well, if there was another person in charge all those, who was on the throne all those years.
And we say all those years, we're going back when she first became queen. Winston Churchill was her first prime minister.
Mm-hmm.
That's a
long time ago.
It was. And, you just got to go back and think, that's unfathomable. Winston Churchill, that was World War II, and yeah, that's how long she served as queen. And she's done a marvelous job, and it's going to be interesting to see how she serves out the rest of her time, but I feel very comfortable with her Queen of England.
Yes, that the future may bring some changes, but for right now, the Church of England is in safe hands with the Queen at the helm.
All right, let's move on to story 1. And in my notes I have, we're going to talk about the Anglican Mafia. Over at St. Andrew... Oops, sorry. I wrote it wrong. All right, over at St. Andrew's Church in North London, the Anglican Consultative Council and Standing Committee had their meeting. And basically what they wanted to do was talk about switching rules because it's not convenient to them. We'll get to... For new viewers, we'll talk about what the Anglican Consultative is further into the story here in the Eastern community and how this whole rigmarole went. For those people who really want to know what happened, we'll let you know right now. They did another switcheroo, George.
Well, that's fairly standard operating procedure. Mm-hmm. The ACC is well known for making up the rules as it goes along or changing rules that are not quite to the liking of the controlling of powers. And this time around, there was a press statement, and it had all sorts of fluffy stuff about talking about gender violence and things like that. And then buried deep in the announcement was, and oh, by the way, the ACC Standing Committee has decided that the president, the chairman, and the vice chairman are not representatives of their own provinces, but they're people of their own standing and therefore stand independently in their membership of the ACC from their provinces. You may think,
here,
so
I want to put the little warning light here. Something's being pulled over your eyes here.
And it's not by us.
Yes.
Why is this sort of buried deep in a story of any importance whatsoever? Well, the Anglican covenant was rejected by the Church of England. It can't take it up again until 2015. One of the rules surrounding the Anglican covenant is that churches that have refused to sign it, their representatives to the ACC may not participate or be involved in its discussion at the ACC.
And why would that be important to the Church of England?
Well, who's the president of the ACC? The Archbishop of Canterbury.
Yeah.
Who is the vice chairman of the ACC? A woman from the Church of England.
Yeah, that's right.
So 2 of the 3 people in leadership positions cannot even discuss the Anglican covenant according to the rules, but they've now sort of fiddled them once again to allow a discussion to take place.
And basically, every time they meet, they've done this. We were in Jamaica, they switched the rules around, did rigmarole to screw up the covenant there. In previous meetings, they changed the rules when they're not convenient. Right in front of you, you've questioned them about what they're doing with individuals who serve as treasurer and shouldn't because they're not qualified to. And their answer was basically, well, that was then, this is now. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't work in church polity. That doesn't work in business. You can't just switch the rules. Bad things happen. And I think that's what we're having here is bad things are happening. The ACC, for all intents and purposes, has become a cancer in the Anglican Church. They've really wedged themselves into a power base that when it began in the, I guess it was 1968?
The 68 Lambeth Conference
Yeah,
proposed the ACC be formed, and the first meeting was held in 71 or 72, I believe.
And they were first held for great reasons. We need to better communicate as a communion. We need to better facilitate food and other issues for people in provinces that don't have it. They were great structure things. We want to talk about theology, doctrine, and teaching, and spreading out the Book of Common Prayer, and working with the places we've colonized, so to speak. And all that was great, but they've really just become the worst part of the United Nations over this last 40 years.
Yes, they've adopted sort of the corrupt management style of the United Nations, of existing solely for the purpose of furthering the careers of the bureaucrats who are running the show. You mentioned something, Kevin, about a conversation held in Jamaica in 2009 when we attended that meeting of the ACC. Let me give you a little background. I attended the 1999 meeting in Dundee, Scotland, and one of the delegates was an American retired bishop. And I asked John L. Peterson, the ACC Secretary General, Canon Peterson, why is this man allowed to participate? Because the rules say that only active, non-retired clergy may serve as delegates. And Canon Peterson said, well, this American bishop was chosen by his church, and though it violates the rules, we are not going to overrule the decision of a national church on this issue. Fast forward 10 years to Jamaica. Yeah. Phil Ashey has been appointed by the Church of Uganda as a clergy representative. The ACC Standing Committee says, no, you're not allowed to be that representative. I asked Kenneth Kieran, by then the new ACC Secretary General, how come in 1999 you say churches make the decision, now in 2009 the Standing Committee makes the decision? And his answer was, that was then, this is now. No change in rules, just it was to the advantage of the Americans to have the rules one way in 99 and a different way in 2009. That's how the ACC works.
Well, what was interesting is they wanted to come off, and this is more recent news, but they wanted to come off as the Anglican Communion Office. Well, and there's a whole story there.
That's a joke, and that one of the things that John L. Peterson once did was that he printed up stationery that said the Anglican Communion Office, that he was the Secretary General. Well, George Carey, the Archbishop of Canterbury, said, rip up that stationery. No one has made you the Anglican Communion Office. Well, George Carey retires, Kenneth Kieran comes in, Rowan Williams comes in, and guess what the stationery now says? The bureaucrats had won in the interim and printed up Anglican Communion Office stationery. No one ever created an Anglican Communion Office. It's not a legal entity. It does not exist. And there's just a constant usurpation, a constant dishonesty, a constant fiddling. Financially, the books have always supposed to have been balanced and they're supposed to be in a surplus, and they're never in a surplus. What do? They ignore their own rules.
They do. And that's part of the cancer problem I talked about, because they're festering other tumor cells in this body of the church. We talked briefly about the instruments of unity. People go, well, that goes back to the polity of the Book of Common Prayer. You could probably find it in the 1662 Book of Common Prayer. No, that was actually a commissioned study from the ACC itself. Didn't they do that just a couple years ago, George?
1998, the Virginia report came up
Yeah.
with this concept of instruments of unity.
Mm-hmm.
One big problem, though, is that the Lambeth Conference and the ACC didn't vote to accept it. It's just a concept that has no legal standing. But people through ignorance and just accept the lies being told out of London. And the problem is, I've been around long enough that I've seen, in other words, I'm not taking this on trust that somebody told me this is the way it was. In my own short lifetime, I have seen again and again and again dishonesty, half-truths, falsehoods being put out under the name of the church. And when I ask about it, I'm officially told, it's none of your business.
Oh, that's true. And it's interesting because you and I, we can go back a couple press officers in Anglican knowledge, and even the retired ones won't talk about it. They're like, listen, you don't want to go there, and you wouldn't believe me if I told you. And it's just, it's one of those things that nobody wants to talk about, but it's that little, it's
not just George and Kevin. Do you remember when Greg Venables was presiding bishop of the Southern Cone? Sure. He had this terrific set-to with Kenneth Kieran, where Kieran lied. Kieran gave this whole press statement of here's how it came about that the South American church was not allowed to have Tito Zavala on a commission. And Greg Venables says, this is untrue. He didn't contact me. We told him we were going to do this. And Kieran decides to ignore what we say and do something else anyway. When primates saying that the ACC Secretary General is a liar, it's not just me, a reporter, that is casting doubt upon its credibility.
Well, we also had trouble with there was a story about the draft covenant, where they said that all these places had accepted the draft covenant, and lo and behold, we learned that by contacting all these provinces, that I never accepted it, we never talked about it, it was never voted on. That draft covenant story told to you by the press office of the Anglican Communion and the Anglican Consultative Council is a lie.
Yes, that's a very good example. The ACC a few years ago decided to change its legal foundation in the UK, and they were required to have all of the members contacted and vote yes or no. Well, they went ahead and changed it, and so I started asking the members. I asked the Church of Uganda, did you ever support this change? They said no, they were never asked. I asked Greg Venables in the Southern Cone, were you asked to support this? No, we were never asked. I asked Neva Ray Fox of the Episcopal Church, did the Episcopal Church's Executive Committee or General Convention endorse this? No, they did not.
Oof.
So, and then I said to the ACC, okay, I've had 3 provinces say that they were not asked to do it. Only the Church of England told me they were. Tell me when and how you received permission to make this change. It's none of your business. The Church of England newspaper has no standing to ask this question.
Wow.
This is a corrupt organization, but it's supposed to be a Christian one.
That's why the intro was the Anglican mobsters. You know, it is sad that we have this type of cancer in the church. And what's happened is, through some foresight, somebody at Lambeth said, hey, we need to have this. And they did it for all the right reasons. But when you let the wrong people in charge of it, it takes a life of its own. And the ACC is the exact model of something that takes a life of its own, becomes corrupt, becomes cancerous, and it's soon going to kill the patient.
Yeah, I mean, when an organization is run by an entity where simony is the rule of the day, where moral corruption is winked at, when financial shenanigans are common, how can it have any standing in the Christian world?
Now, this is going to be interesting, George. We've just reported a pretty hard story here on the Anglican Consultative Council. We've called them a cancer. We've talked about how they became to be, what they're doing, and what they should have done. Ouch. So what's going to happen to Anglican Unscripted or Anglican TV here? In the past, they've tried to stop our reporting. Well, what do you mean? They haven't, nuked or bombed? They won't let us go places we need to be to report the story. We had a very difficult time getting into Jamaica, into Kingston. I sent a reporter. They wouldn't let him in. I had to go and down there myself to have a seat at the press table. And these are very difficult issues because the whole thing, if you're doing something wrong, is to control the press.
Mm-hmm. It is a very dodgy organization, and they're coming off of a bad Lambeth conference and the bad primates meeting in Dublin, where in both cases people didn't show up. Now, do you think there's going to be a boycott of the ACC meeting?
It's my understanding from talking to people at GAFCON that now that they've had this new GAFCON leadership meeting, that GAFCON is all in. They're going to re-participate in all the Anglican events, Lambeth, and future things, because there's going to be a new leadership in Canterbury that they're going to want to work with. And I think there's no reason now to stay away from these meetings, because with new leadership, they may have new influence. We'll have to see what happens there. But George, obviously, it's going to be a developing story. I would imagine this week there'll be some response from the Anglican Consultative Council for the story we've done. If not, great. If so, I'd like to see what their response is to this, and any defense of their actions over the last dozen years. This is obviously something that is important to take care of in the church, and as press people, we're doing our job in bringing the news to you. And for those out there who know more about what's going on with the ACC, send us emails and comments. We'd like to develop this story further. Via the magic of Skype and that little blue button on our icon screen, I'm able to talk to Alan Haley in California, who just broke off a nice long day's work, I suppose.
Right.
So we got home and we got our press releases, and I see a press release here from the Falls Church saying that they're going to appeal their verdict from Judge Bellows. And you and I talked about this case several times now, and last time we talked about it, when the verdict was done, we said, well, this is kind of a done deal, because Judge Bellows really said he had to rule this way based on precedents set by the Virginia courts in the past, and you forced me to rule this way. This appeal really brings to light some things that we've always known, but it lays it out pretty well in an analytical way, and a way that gives good jurisprudence to an appeal, in my opinion.
Yes, I agree, and it's now that they've the press release that a notice of their intent to appeal, they now have appealed by filing a brief with the Virginia Supreme Court, and it does make these points. It has 6 assignments of error that it says are worthy of the Virginia Supreme Court's attention. And the first and foremost of them, the first 2, have to do with the way Judge Bellows gave overriding effect in his decision to the canons of the Episcopal Church that had been enacted starting in the 1860s, late 1860s and early 1870s, regarding handling church consecrated property, saying that the canons would say, for example, that the consecrated property can only be alienated or given away with the consent of the bishop. These were all, even as the Episcopal Church's own legal commentators, White and Dickman, noted ever since they first started commenting on the canons. They said these canons have only moral force. They don't have any civil force, because you would have to go into every one of the 50 states and make sure that their laws were in conformity with this, or you'd have to record some document that gave the veto power to the bishop like that, to put people on notice in that state as to what power the bishop had.
Well, especially when you deal with consecrated and unconsecrated items. Many churches have items that are unconsecrated. So do the laws not apply to that? I know in the Falls Church case, they own a strip mall, and that's worth millions of dollars.
Correct.
And that would mean, because the canons don't say unconsecrated, that this law does not apply to them.
That's one of the points they make in their brief on appeal, that Judge Bellows made no distinction between consecrated and unconsecrated property, and read all the canons that have to do with consecrated property to apply equally well to give the diocese and the church a trust interest in the unconsecrated properties like the shopping mall. And that's a major asset of the Falls Church and a major source of its income. So yeah, that's one of the points they make on appeal, and I think it's a telling point.
Now, is there any problem if the Falls Church, even before or after its appeal has left the building? Is there a timing problem if they leave the building?
No, well, so far they've complied with all the terms of Judge Bellows' order, and that lets them now, they can appeal, and if any court reverses the judgment below of Judge Bellows, then it's going to be up to the diocese to hand the money back that it took as part of Judge Bellows' decision. And, for example, $2.4 million in funds of the Falls Church that was on hand in early 2007 when Judge Bellows ruled that at that point all funds in the hands of Falls Church, whether restricted donations, donations that had been said would never go to the Episcopal Church, doesn't matter. Judge Bellows said they all have to be turned over to the Episcopal Diocese. So, and that was what they did, and that's another ground of the appeal, is that Judge Bellows has, his ruling ignored the wishes of the donors who since the 1990s had restricted where the money could go, and Falls Church said, we had absolute discretion on sending any money to the diocese. There was no mandatory pledge that we were subject to. Everything was voluntary.
Well,
and so to ignore voluntary donors' intent is just wrong.
Well, it's wrong, but I also think it violates IRS code as well.
Exactly.
Anglican TV is a 501c, and I can't tell you the paperwork I have to go to if somebody says this money has to go just to buying batteries for a camera.
Right.
Then so funds that have certain descriptions and discrepancies assigned to them need special care, and the IRS protects those.
Yeah, and Judge Bellows' ruling kind of forced the Falls Church to ignore that law, ignore those restrictions, even though that was the terms on which they had accepted the money. If they weren't going to follow those restrictions, as you say, they were bound in law to give the money back. And so retroactively for him to say, well, it didn't matter because it was gift to an Episcopal entity, quote unquote, Falls Church by then was, and had never been a constituent member of the Episcopal Church to such an extent that there was a confusion between it and the diocese and the national church. The whole uproar all through the 90s and the early first decade of this century was over what the things the national church and the diocese were doing versus what they wanted the church to do. So it's that's another, and that's the point, by the way, on which the Virginia Attorney General has joined them and filed a brief of his own, in the Virginia Supreme Court, saying yes, the Falls Church is correct. The Judge Bellows totally ignored the intent of the donors on this, and that violates Virginia charitable trust law, which gives honor to the intent of the individual donors, and so therefore that's another reason to take this appeal. And then finally, of course, the other reason that this, or the other objective that the filing of these briefs accomplishes, is it keeps the case going for a while until we know what the U.S. Supreme Court is going to do with the two petitions pending before it, from the one from Georgia, the other from Bishop Seabury Church in Connecticut. And those petitions will probably be acted upon at a conference of the U.S. Supreme Court in mid-June, around the 14th or so. And so we should know within a couple of days after that whether the Supreme Court's going to grant review in either of those cases. And if it does, then the Falls Church will be in a great position to press its appeal forward, because by the time then the U.S. Supreme Court hands down a decision, the Virginia Supreme Court will have something to look at.
Well, this is so unique because we're dealing with neutral principles. And
Correct.
Neutral principles is well-established law, but it's well-established law that is entertained by everybody except a church.
Yeah, and this is why it's so crazy. Judges give lip service to neutral principles, but the canons that they apply are by no means neutral. They're one-sided. They're passed at the national level without much deliberation whatsoever, and they unilaterally, without the individual consent of the thousands of parishes, purport to make those parishes' properties subject to a trust. And so when churches give that kind of overriding effect to a church canon, it overrides all kinds of state law principles. Every entity in the United States has the ability to do this. other than a national church which can purport to pass such a canon. So just by signaling out the church canons and giving them such prominence in violation to override state law, Judge Bellows basically was not applying neutral principles. He was applying principles that favored particular denominational churches like this that pass national canons.
I know of a church here in Connecticut that allows the AA to meet there almost 3 times a week.
Right.
Therefore, the AA occupies the church more frequently than the church and its church services. If the AA met and determined to pass their own Dennis canon that where they meet, they own that property, what would a judge have to do?
Nice question, Kevin.
It just occurred to me, if it's, are we doing possession 9/10 of the law? How are we determining this?
Yeah, and it's also the case that Judge Bellows, he held that all the canons and all the various things down to the Sunday bulletins that were supplied by the National Church and all that showed evidence of the National Church's proprietary interest, quote, and contractual interest in the property. And that was under earlier Virginia Supreme Court precedents, but it makes no sense because the Falls Church, every one of its deeds, all the deeds to all of its properties do not mention the National Church as such. They mention the Falls Episcopal Church or the Episcopal Church known as the Falls Church. Mm-hmm. And practically in many cases, those deeds were obtained to their property. They obtained them before the Episcopal Church was even in existence. Mm-hmm. I mean, the Falls Church started the same year that George Washington was born in 1732, and he was one of the people who attended it. Mm-hmm. So we're talking here a crazy application of the law that says that regardless of how you got your property before the Episcopal Church was formed, once you affiliate yourself with the Episcopal Church, then regardless of how you've held your property up to that point, you unilaterally change all those trusts and understandings by which the donors long ago gave you that property. And now all of a sudden you have to hold it in favor of this national entity that you've joined. And it's just crazy. It really drives me wild.
I have to say that Judge Bellows, his verdict was unconstitutional. And I want to say this because if I'm not mistaken, the Falls Church predates the Constitution of the U.S.
Yes.
Okay.
1732 versus 1789.
So
right?
Can an entity that predated the Constitution have any influence over that entity? I mean, no, of course not. And so, it's completely unconstitutional. I hate to introduce this new thing to the legal scholars, but, you got to really go back and think, you're trying to influence something from the 1700s, and it's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's too bad because it's this kind of thing. But unfortunately, there are these crazy precedents all over in various states, and the judges throw up their hands and say, "Oh, the Episcopal Church. Oh, yeah, you always get this kind of result, and so we'll just give it to you again." And it has to stop somewhere. It really has to stop because this freight train has gone on too long and built up far too many bad precedents. Judge Bellows' decision, of course, is just a lower court, has no precedential value anywhere. So it will Supreme Court to sort it out this time, and in a decision to say what it really meant in these earlier decisions where it said if you impress your property with a contractual and proprietary interest, by then that gives the national church some sort of control over it. Because don't forget too, until very recently, Virginia law did not even allow national churches to hold trust interests in property.
That's right. Yeah.
So all property had to be held by local trustees in trust for a parish or something like that, but you couldn't have it. And so this once again turns the Virginia law on its head by saying that, well, even though it wasn't legitimate for the national church to acquire such an interest back in 1870 when it started passing these canons, that interest somehow suddenly sprang into existence once Virginia allowed national churches to have trusts in property by a law passed early in the century. It's crazy again. It's totally, and I recommend that everyone read the brief. Take care to read it. It's well written. It's brief, and you can understand things mostly. It's linked at the Anglican website for the Falls Church.
Are you going to link to it from Curmudgeon?
Yeah, I'll link
Okay.
it. I'll write
So
on this.
I'll put your link up. It's crazy, and you have to deal with this all day long, and I feel sorry for you. Obviously, you love it. You're very good at it, but I deal with this 20 minutes a day, and I have to go take a couple of Tylenol. It's crazy. So,
Right.
Alan, I want to thank you for your time on a Friday night, and we'll catch you next week. Story 2 is a hard story to report, George, because sometimes, as we've seen in the spring of 2012, churches lose their lawsuits or have to settle and move on. And that's happened here in Canada. We have St. Hilda's Church, St. George's Church, Good Shepherd Church, all from the Diocese of Niagara, have decided, hey, we've lost enough, we're done fighting, we're going to refocus our lives on Christ and move on. And, wow, we're seeing this over and over again, and it's hard to watch, George.
Yes, the three parishes, part of ANIC, the Anglican Church in Canada, Anglican Network in Canada, have lost a number of court battles, and rather than take it to the next level, they've decided to settle with the Diocese of Niagara. They've turned over the properties. In return, all litigation and all future litigation ceases, and they're allowed to take with them some vestments and some personal items from the churches. There's a statement from one of the wardens of the churches saying that, it really is sad losing the physical structure of a church where people have been baptized and buried and have come to know Jesus Christ. That's sad, giving that up. But at the same time, they're walking in faith, going out into the world, trusting that God will still provide. And in many ways, this is an exciting new time for them, because they truly are walking in faith out from those things that they identified as being necessary for the church, the building, and they've learned what is really necessary is the power of the Holy Spirit.
And sure, but this is a hollow victory because these churches will remain empty and have to be sold. We have the same problem here in Virginia, where we have the Diocese of Virginia won against the Cana and all those lawsuits with Falls Church and Churl, and those churches predominantly are being left empty. And at some point, the diocese is going to say, I have to sell those churches.
It is a hollow church. It is a hollow victory, and will result in a hollow church.
Church, yes.
But I think I really wouldn't look at it that way, because the people I've been talking to in Virginia and in Canada and in Pittsburgh, they are basically saying, out of adversity, we have come to see the hand of God directing us. Mm-hmm. And that it is in this difficult time that we are learning fully to trust in the power of God. And that we're not trusting in our money or in our lawyers, as important as they may be, but we are trusting that God will provide. And guess what? He is.
Yes. And that's what he likes to do the most. And so it's a win-win situation. God gets to do what he loves to do, and people get to respond to that. It's that's the cool part of the story. The problem is, why did we have to get here? We got here because a long time ago, people started to take their mind off Christ. Live from England, our great friend Peter Old, he's going to really help us with the celebration of the Diamond Jubilee. Well,
Yay!
Yay, I know.
Yay, Queen!
Queen! Busy year over in England. You got the Olympics, you got the Jubilee, you got Rowan retiring. You got lots of things going on. So, is there a prayer appropriate for this?
There is. In fact, the Church of England has helped us out.
Okay.
Funny that you asked. The Church of England has it. It's almost as though we discussed it before we filmed, Kevin. The Church of England has helped us out. There's a cracking prayer for the Diamond Jubilee.
Okay.
Do you want to hear it?
Yes, hear it, please.
Let's pray. God of time and eternity, whose Son reigns as servant, not master, we give you thanks and praise that you have blessed this nation, the realms and territories, with Elizabeth, our beloved and glorious Queen. In this year of Jubilee, grant her your gifts of love and joy and peace as she continues in faithful obedience to you, her Lord and God, and in devoted service to her lands and peoples and those of the Commonwealth, now and all the days of her life, through Jesus Christ our Lord. And all the people said, Amen.
Amen. Now, it's interesting because most of the people in England have had no other monarch other than Queen Elizabeth.
Absolutely. This is only the second Diamond Jubilee that the English monarchy has ever seen.
Yeah, and it's hard to put in context because in previous generations, and we're talking the 1600s and 1700s, you could go through 3 or 4 different monarchs in a summer.
Absolutely, absolutely, yes.
So this is really a bit of time of stability, mostly for England, but also for the church and for Europe as well.
Yes.
Times like this, and it's nice that we can pay tribute to the
absolutely,
Queen.
and what you colonists forget sometimes is that the Queen is the supreme governor of the Church of England.
Yep.
When a bishop is made a bishop, he goes and kneels in front of the Queen, and the Queen prays for him. I mean, it's extraordinary. When I was ordained, I swore an oath of allegiance to our current Queen and her heirs and successors. It's a big deal here. She is my boss.
Wow. Now, how does that really relate to an international church called the Anglican Communion?
Yeah, it basically means that if you're American, you're wrong. That's how it relates.
Apparently.
It's really interesting. The Queen has, behind the scenes, we're told, been getting a little bit more involved with the Church of England and issues around sort of gay marriage and so on. Ultimately, the Queen is the supreme temple governor of the Church of England, and all the churches that kind of have their historical roots in the Church of England, kind of, a bit like the Commonwealth, have her as some kind of sense of continuity, I think.
Well, it's my understanding that several years ago, or a couple years ago now, just with the phone call, she ended the reign of a bishop, or a bishop-to-be who was of homosexual persuasion.
There is the rumour that it was a phone call from the Queen to Rowan Williams that finished off Jeffrey John. But we can't confirm that. That may just be wishful thinking.
I'm sorry. In England, rumor counts as news. Don't give me this, it's only a rumor stuff. If it's
only a rumor, I can't confirm that.
Okay, let's go on to some more rumors. You're having a little trouble.
Oh no, these are not rumors. These are hard facts.
Hard facts.
Hard facts, like Obama's birth certificate.
Yeah. Okay. Hard, long, storied, Hawaiian. So let's go on to what we call women bishops in England. And what's interesting is this has been a constant conversation for 6, maybe a dozen years, and it's gone back and forth. And in the past, if you gave a liberal an inch, that was enough. An inch at a time, they were happy with that. We're happy with it. Now they're so used to the feast that we've been giving them that an inch is no longer enough. What?
Yeah, very interesting. Last week we reported on the House of Bishops amendments to the legislation. If you remember, Kevin, the House of Bishops met a week or so ago, and they were the last point where changes could be made to the legislation. When the Synod debates this again in July, it basically has to go for what is in front of it or scrap it. And they introduced essentially hard coding into the legislation the fact that dissenting churches and parishes could choose their bishop. Well, the Liberals have been consulting on this. Women and the Church is the group which is kind of, spearheading this, called Watch. And they seem to be getting like a 4-to-1 back from their membership that they don't like this. So we're starting to see a possibility that the Liberals are going to vote down the women bishops legislation.
Well, which is interesting, because if they accepted just this little piece now, in not 3 or 4 years, they could add their own flavor to what type of bishop it could be.
You would think so, but the Church of England works really slowly.
Yes, it does.
So the point is, if we meet in Synod 2 or 3 times a year, and we just sort of talk about stuff and drink cups of tea and move it on slowly, right? You guys meet every 3 years, and you just do it. It's like, we'll have that heresy, that heresy, that heresy. Let's do it. Yeah, bang, gone. 3 years. See you in Disneyland.
Heresy for dummies. Yes.
Yeah, basically. So, if this legislation passes in July, that's going to be it for another 15, 20 years. It will stick. And we will have what the Liberals call this theology of taint, which is essentially the idea that a woman who's a bishop isn't really a proper sacramental bishop, or doesn't have the authority, depending whether you're coming from the Anglo-Catholic or the conservative evangelical end on this, and the idea that a man who's been ordained by a woman isn't a proper priest.
Well,
so that's really interesting.
It is, because either the women bishops are second-class bishops, or the flyover bishops are second-class bishops. Yeah, who are the second-class bishops in this?
Well, the House of Bishops have tried to do a typical Anglican fudge and get around this and basically say these extra bishops, these sort of flying in bishops, let's just call them flying bishops. That's what they'll still be. They will ordain and confirm by dint of their own bishopness, rather than by dint of transferred authority from the diocesan woman bishop. That's really interesting.
Yes, it is, and it implies that it's a second-class bishop. You don't have all the authority of a real bishop.
Well, what the proponents of women bishops are basically saying is that this takes away from the diocesan her sacramental authority in the diocese.
Right.
And fair play to them. Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Let's just be honest. Yes, it does. And the question is, what kind of compromise are we going to go for? Essentially, as you know, the Liberals ideally want a single clause. Women can be bishops. If you don't like it, suck it. Yeah?
That's right.
Right? That's what they want. As soon as you accept some kind of compromise, you've essentially already accepted that a woman bishop, for the moment, will not be, in some of the parishes, everything as a bishop for that parish.
Right.
And so once you've accepted that, why is it a problem just to hard code this little bit of accommodation?
Now, 4-1, they say they're not going to vote for this. If they don't vote for this, that means no women bishops?
No, 4-1, they're saying that they don't like it.
Okay. If they don't, if they don't vote for it, does that scrub all women bishops?
Yeah, if they don't vote for it, even if they vote against it, basically, if the legislation fails in July, that's it for this quinquennium of the synod. So we would basically have to start again from scratch in about 3 or 4 years' time.
Wow,
it's a big deal.
It is.
It's a big deal.
Well,
but some Liberals will be prepared to do that. They'll be prepared to kind of push it off for 4 or 5 years in order, in 4 or 5 years, as they see it, to get the real deal.
Well, that's, kudos to them for trying that. But,
yeah.
Well, Anglican Unscripted obviously wishes England a happy Jubilee. This is an incredible time for you guys over there, yonder.
Yes, we do. and if I can take this opportunity just to, in grace and love, offer an opportunity for repentance to any colonist. You know where to find me. We can do that for you. Today would be this whole weekend would be a glorious weekend for you to be received back into the empire.
Okay, I'm putting a link to your website for further comments.
That would be great.
Thank you, Peter, for your time, and really appreciate it.
Well, bless Kevin.
George, we're going to move on to a story we covered before. I don't know if people remember, December 15th of last year, Anglican Unscripted did a story about Uruguay electing a new bishop from Canada. His name was Michael Policel, and he was the Secretary General of Canada. Now, what caught your eye and caught my eye was conservative Uruguay electing kind of liberal, namby-pamby General Secretary of the Anglican Church of Canada. And the story's really developed and changed since we first reported in December.
Yes, I mean, when the election was announced, we contacted the presiding bishop of the Southern Cone, Gregory Venables, and said, tell us a bit more about this election. We understand Bishop Venables came out to Argentina from England years ago, so there are a lot of foreign bishops in South America, but they all shared a common conservative evangelical theology and ethos. And it seemed on its face that the Secretary General of the Anglican Church of Canada was not of a similar theological mind. What did they know? And Bishop Venables said, well, we're going to have to get back to you because this has come as a bit of a surprise to us as well. And they never did get back to us.
No, they didn't call us, but I think, and obviously we can't claim any influence of this, but obviously they did more investigation, and in their investigation they found that they did not want to have Michael Polisel to be their bishop. And it's my hope he didn't sell his house, and that his arrangements back in Canada are still there.
Now, they've not announced the reason why he was turned away. We can speculate, and it may have to do with his actions as General Secretary, helping regularize the place of homosexual clergy and liturgies in the Anglican Church of Canada. May have nothing to do with that. We don't know because we've not been told. But I think it does say something about communications in this day and age.
It does, because in the past you could go someplace and start over again. In the 21st century, in the internet age, in the video age, in this news age, not only does your history follow you, it often precedes you. So when you get where you're going, they know who you are and who you were. And that's complete different than it was 50, 60, 70 years ago, when this Anglican church thing was just starting to take off real big in Africa and South America, where they would always entertain foreign bishops. Now they go, you have white-faced, we need to investigate. On to Canterbury Sweepstakes, that famous feature of Anglican Unscripted where two gentlemen sit down with a betting sheet and talk about the new potential candidates for Archbishop of Canterbury. Last week we did 5, this week we're going to do another 4 or 5. We're starting off with N.T. Wright. Let's do the odds first.
11-1, according to Paddy Powers, the UK bookmaker.
Everybody's heard of N.T. Wright. He's a famous author. He's a New Testament scholar. He's an open evangelical. He's a conservative. What do you think of those odds, George?
I think they're fair. He's 65 years old, so he's in the older category. He's not, when he served in the House of Bishops as Bishop of Durham, he had a reputation of having a very good brain, but he was not the most politically adept or astute person. He could not build coalitions. He could not get people to work with him.
Which is a problem when you want to be the Archbishop of Canterbury, because the role has more dynamics than you'll ever discover till you're there. And N.T. Wright, lovable character, great guy. I've met him a couple times, and he's, like you said, very learned, very skilled, and I love his books. But the step into the Archbishop of Canterbury is a big one. Our next contestant is Bishop John Welby. He actually replaced N.T. Wright as Bishop of Durham.
Yes, Justin Welby is 56. He is the 4th most senior clergyman in the Church of England as Bishop of Durham. And 100 years ago, he probably would have been the choice. He's a graduate of Eton, and he was educated at Cambridge. He's related to Conservative Party leader R.A.B. Butler, who, were it not for his untimely death, would have been Prime Minister in the 1950s. This is someone within the British establishment, someone who by birth and heritage and connection is connected to other people in government and the city and the great families of England.
Well, George, we forgot to, when people are on the edge of their seat, they want to know the odds.
Oh, they want to know the odds. Well, the odds for Justin Welby are 12-1. But having been educated at Eton and Cambridge, I think those are strikes against him. I just don't see him getting it right now. Durham may be the pinnacle of his career. Yeah.
Now let's move on to Bishop Kings, Graham Kings. He isn't really a bishop, he's a suffragan bishop. I don't know what his chances
Sherburne.
are. Yeah.
Well, his chances, according to Paddy Powers, are 20-1. And I think that's fair. I mean, he is in his early 60s, late 50s, so he may be the right age, but he's a suffragan bishop. And suffragan bishops, I think it'd be very unusual to make that double jump, not being a diocesan before you become Archbishop of Canterbury.
Yeah,
and
that's
the other thing I think is that he is the theological secretary for Fulcrum, the evangelical group. And as such, he is sort of a center-right evangelical. He's the acceptable face of the evangelicalism in the Church of England. That's why he's so high up there on the list. But by the same token, I don't think he's someone whom evangelicals would come out for and support en masse.
Okay, George, let's move on to James Jones, the Bishop of Liverpool. What are his odds?
20-1. And I think that's
Okay.
a fair assessment of his chances.
Well, yeah, because he's not the guy he used to be, which happens a lot in clergy. I remember years ago he was a stellar conservative, he had great evangelical beliefs, but recently he's been campaigning to be the next Archbishop of Canterbury.
Yes, he's campaigning the way people do when they want to become a bishop. It's not an overt campaign with signs or anything, but he's let it be known that he'd like to do it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he's moved away from the evangelical beliefs of his youth. And, you know, an example of such was recently he apologized for opposing the election of Geoffrey John as Bishop of Reading. He's someone who's moved away from a conservative base to a more liberal position, but the liberals haven't embraced him by any means either. So at 20-1, I think that's a fair assessment of his chances.
Sure. Bishop Stephen Cottrell, he's an affirming Catholic. Did we talk last week about what an affirming Catholic is?
There's liberal Catholics,
Yes.
which are Anglo-Catholics of a liberal theological persuasion, and then
Frank
even
Griswold,
more
yeah.
liberal, more liberal than liberal Catholics are affirming Catholics. Frank Griswold is an affirming Catholic, for example. And Stephen Cottrell was the man who got the job in Reading after Geoffrey Johns was turned away. And he has always backed Johns and the gay agenda, and he's a real liberal true believer. And at 28-1 odds, I think that's a fair assessment. I don't think he's going to be made Archbishop of Canterbury, but people who have a liberal persuasion are talking up his name. That's why we see him on the list.
Sure. He's been talked up a lot. Now there's about 10 more candidates on the list, and they go from like 50-1 to 200-1. And next week we probably won't talk about them because they're people you probably never recognized or heard about before. We may move on to talk more about the Crown Nomination Committee or do more in-depth profiles of these bishops. We'll see what happens, what we have time for. Okay, viewers, you made it to the end of episode 42 of Anglican Unscripted. This is the time I say, wow, congratulations, you made it. It's harder even to tape than to watch. I know, hard, really. So George and I got a couple announcements going on. We're going to be at the Provincial Assembly next week in North Carolina. George and I will be videotaping what's going on and live streaming it for you on Anglican.tv. We're also going to have what's called a meetup where we get to meet the viewers of Anglican Unscripted. We haven't chosen the location on the campus of Ridgecrest yet, but we'll put that on my Facebook page when it happens, and we'll send out an email to everybody. I guess we also need to raise money. You want to go to General Convention, George?
Yes, General Convention meets from July 5th through 12th in Indianapolis. And it is going to be a very important gathering because we're going to talk about the Anglican Covenant, we're going to talk about restructuring the Episcopal Church, we're going to talk about gay liturgies. A lot is going to be happening, and I really need to be able to get there to cover it. And that costs money. For plane fare, hotels, it's an expensive time, and we're trying to raise about $1,500. We've had a response, and I'd like to thank those who've contributed, but I really do need your help to get there and to get back. So please do contribute if you can. Yeah,
please do. I mean, the reality is we've raised 1/15 of the money for George to go. We need to raise more. And if you go to the website Anglican.tv/donate, you can donate sizable amounts or small amounts. But we really need to have the onus here because George does not work for a periodical that has the travel money to send him these types of things anymore. And really, if I wanted a reporter there, I'd want George there. And it's great that he can do this, and he has some of the free time to do this type of travel where he can go with me to the Provincial Assembly, he can do General Convention. Later in July, I'll be at the Forward in Faith meeting in St. Louis, and those are exciting things that we get to do and bring that news to you. And you as the viewer get to watch, and we hope that you can show that appreciation through donations and helping us travel to more and more events. I know I'd like to have $1 million budget, but it's not possible quite yet. I want to thank you for watching Anglican Unscripted episode 42. I'm Kevin Carlson.
And I'm George Conger, and you've been watching episode 42.
What's the date?
June 2nd.
Yeah, that's right. Cool.
Get bishops of their own choice, which is essentially the flying bishops of the panel now that it's hard coded, the liberals are going, well, we're not sure that we want this.
All right, take off the headroom.
Take off the headroom.
Take off the headroom.
So like that.
A little more. Nice. Yep. That's how you look is how I'll look on the camera. I mean, you probably won't look as good. We do what we can.
Shut up. Shut up, columnist. So, well, when we do this, are we going to have like a bit of God Save the Queen?
Yeah, that'll be the intro. The intro musical.
If I can find you like a Union flag in the sort of blowing in the wind bit of a video, will you grab it off YouTube and use it?
Yeah, absolutely. Send me a link, and that'd be kind of cool.
So let's begin with Diamond Jubilee
sort
of weekend.
Got it.